Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming along this evening to listen to our very special guest speaker, Eran, who's come all the way from Israel. We appreciate the effort that each and every one of you have made in order to listen and hear the importance of Beersheba, a truly history-changing event and one that we are still living and breathing today. We at the Israel Travel Centre began our journey to Beersheba back in 2008 with the opening of the park of the Australian Soldier. I'm delighted that Kevin Marnie from Special Forces is here with us tonight, because it was through Kevin that the seed of Beersheba was sown with us, and we brought a group of descendants and ex-servicemen to Israel in 2008, where in a most memorable moment we laid wreaths at the base of the sculpture of Peter Corlett. We decided to lay stones, and people said to us, "Why are you laying stones?" And we said, because stones are forever. They're a symbol of more immortality. And we as Jewish people lay stones for that reason. So each one of the descendants of the people who fought in the charge, they picked up a stone and they laid it at the base of the memorial at Beersheba in the Park of the Australian Soldier. And that is our goal here tonight, to ensure that the bravery of those soldiers and this very important battle is etched into our memories forever. And we shall be presenting a series of commemorative tours so that each and every one of you will have the opportunity to come and visit Israel and particularly pay homage at Beersheba, at this very important place in history.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. As you heard, the Hebrew name is Eran Tearosh. And I'm a very active tour guide in Israel, wandering around the country in many different ways, shapes, and forms with all kinds of people in all different fields. However, a special corner is dedicated to everything to do with the military campaign that took place in the Holy Land during the Great War, for the simple reason. Later on, I found that I have also some family connections to the thing, but originally, hey, we're always looking for something that no one touched before. That's where we can make a difference. We can put our input and so on and so forth. So from my point of view, it was so fascinating. And I found an incredible world, managed to find quite a few friends who share the same passion. And together we formed a fascinating place or organization, which is the Society for the Heritage of World War I in Israel. A few years ago, when my mother realized that, hey, what can I say? My son is going in this strange direction, among other things. And so she said, she opened a cupboard that I wasn't aware of. And she said, well, I think it's about time that you take this. And I just looked at her and I said, Mom, is there something you're not telling me? Well, she was about 9 years old during World War II when the Australians were around, and so it wasn't like a serious question, but still, at the same time, it was like, hey, what? And she said, well, I was visiting Australia, and the minute I saw that, I felt all my nostalgia, emotions, etc., coming through. Okay. A few weeks later, my aunt sent me some photos, and she said, now that you're the chairman of the society, I think it should be in your case, in your place. And she sent me over a set of photos from the backyard of my great-grandmother, which I still remember very well, of New Zealander motorcycles who were camped during World War I in the backyard. And like, I wasn't aware of all that. Later on, I found some other stuff, but I'll show that to you in a minute. Here and there, we're initiating projects, and the projects include, for example, Mr. Rob Schneider is here, and he mentioned the very, I would say, impressive project of the Anzac Trail, and we're initiating all kinds of similar ones. I'll come to that in a few minutes. Here's an example of a little piece, of a little part of our exhibition, a very humble one, and yet we have tremendous findings that we found from all over battlefields throughout Israel. Here's an example, or a map, which is showing us the Anzac Trail, which is really following the great flanking movement of the Australian forces, not only Australian, but mostly Australian, flanking the area of Beersheba in order to come to that big day of the charge, which we'll talk about quite a lot during this evening. In a different place, not too far from the beginning of the Anzac Trail, we have this fascinating memorial that was put over many years ago. Today, it's just next to the border with Gaza Strip and the Palestinian Authority that has some power over there. Official ceremonies. This is something that was a few weeks ago. Mount Scopus in Jerusalem, the official Australian-New Zealand ceremony on Mount Scopus on Anzac Day. And I had to put this because Naftali is over there standing in the corner, and I just had to put him inside. So there we are. Now, back to my mom's house. When I was unpacking some things, suddenly I came across a tiny little pamphlet over there, and I just looked at it and said, wow. Now I understood a little bit better that whole thing of her coming nostalgic and buying the hat. I scanned a few pages because this is of a survey unit that was doing drawing maps basically, from 1942, Christmas. Note this incredible mentioning, and please read what's written down there because it's so important. What it says here is Anzac Reborn. And I'm going to come back to this idea of names and what Anzac stands for and how it's all connected in a minute. However, the most moving one for me was the back page, and this is it. And what we see here, of course, is the survey unit up there, and we see this Australian soldier with the map and the parents in the background, wife and kid, and just look at him sitting on that file of books over there. And on the pile of books, that's the best seat when you sit down and reflect suddenly about what is behind. So from my point of view, it was so moving that when I saw that the first time, I said, okay, that I want to have here in the presentation and to show you.
2,000 miles away from the trench stalemate in France, another kind of war was being fought in the desert wastes and river valleys of the Middle East. An old-fashioned war, a war of small armies and large spaces, where mobility and maneuver still counted, where success or failure depended not on millions of men, not on the massed products of industry, but on the personality and leadership of generals, where cavalry was not an out-of-date spectator of vast killing matches, but the vital instrument of fast-moving offensives.
In order to understand something about, we have to ask ourselves, hey, why is this little piece of land in the Middle East so vital and so important throughout history? How come everyone heard about Canaan, the Holy Land, Palestine, Israel? How come? It's so small. And the answer was given in the 16th century by an incredibly talented cartographer who really did it for more, I would say, religious reasons, but still, hey, bingo, hands out, that's it. He captured the idea. Portraying the world as a gigantic flower where we have Asia on the right, Europe on the left, and Africa below, and the bridge connecting those three continents is the Holy Land, and in its midst, Jerusalem.
But the Turks still ruled over the crossroads of the world, collision point of the imperial ambitions of the European powers. The Middle East, Egypt and the Persian Gulf, was the key to the British hold on her Indian Empire. To keep the Middle East safe from France, Nelson had sunk Napoleon's fleet at the Battle of the Nile. To keep it safe from Russia, Britain had fought the Crimean War. Since its opening in 1869, the Suez Canal had become the direct route linking Britain to India and Australia and New Zealand. And since 1882, the British had been the paramount power in Egypt.
So that demonstrates, again, how important and central that part of the world is. And there were all kinds of growing interests. Some of them were completely new to the world. For example, the British desperately wanted that part that was displayed there because a new thing became so important, oil. And therefore Mesopotamia on one side, the Suez Canal on the other side, and there you have the mapping of the main interests of the British power and why they are putting so much effort in that direction. At the beginning of the war, the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish, didn't take side. at least not officially. Practically, they were on the side of the Germans. But it will take a few months for them to be forced by a German action to join actively the war. And crazy as this may sound, they're going into the area of the Holy Land, transferring an incredible amount of soldiers through in a country that didn't have any infrastructure whatsoever to support something like that. And they're sending them through the heart of the Sinai Desert to attack the Suez Canal. Hard to believe, but they were able to do that. I can't say that it was a complete surprise, but they managed to get the Suez Canal, they managed to attack the canal, and by that, bringing the first involvement of Australians and New Zealanders in the area. All those who were supposed to arrive in Europe had to land down in Egypt and stay there and protect from the side of the locals, however, at the same time from the attacking forces of the Turks, and that was the first involvement of the Australians in the Middle East.
Egypt and the Suez Canal were secure. The British commander in Egypt, Sir Archibald Murray, wanted to crown his success with a victorious counterstroke. Stage by stage, the British in Egypt were drawn into a major campaign for the conquest of the Holy Land. Across the Sinai Desert they marched, the route taken by Bonaparte in 1799. Like Bonaparte, the British government allowed themselves to be dazzled by the names of fabulous cities, holy places that had lured European soldiers since the Crusades, Jerusalem and Damascus. This too was a war for old-fashioned objectives, but it was fought with modern means. A wire netting track for vehicles was laid across the wastes of sand, and a pipeline to bring up the water without which the men and beasts of the army could not live. Mile by mile, a railway was laid behind the army, linking it with its base in the Nile Delta. By March 1917, Murray was through the desert and at the gates of Palestine. Murray's mounted regiments, British, Australian, New Zealand and Indian, were the key to his plan of attack on the Turkish defenses.
And so, just on the eve of 1917, actually that's the first arrival to the gates of the Holy Land. Battles the area of Rafah and El Arish take place, and they secure themselves a nice line. Preparations, though, to break through are in progress, and the idea is something quite formidable that's blocking their way, Gaza. When Murray was prepared, he sent his people on a very impressive operation. Problem was that we're talking about still this meeting point between the old world and the new world. And therefore, we'd find that generals were so way back behind and didn't have anything to, any understanding of what really was happening in the front line.
Our particular job was to follow through with the light horse and get the other side of Gaza and come round towards the sea, kind of so that the Turks were actually enclosed. They had the sea on one side of them and troops all around them.
In the confusion of battle, the British thought they had failed, when in fact the Turks were on the edge of defeat.
There was a withdrawal, and we went back a short way for the night, much to our disappointment because the objectives had been reached. But the disappointment and dismay and bewilderment was all the greater the next morning when we'd found we'd got to do it all over again.
And indeed, that's what's so tragic. The following day, they returned. This time, the Turks were already prepared, and they were not able to do that. And so, preparations are launched towards the second battle of Gaza. In a very, well, it's not fair what I'm going to say now, but you know, when we look at it today with our knowledge of what happened, A, B, of our military expertise of today, our tactics of war that we know today, our weaponry today, communications today, and so on and so forth. So it's a little bit unfair to try to judge things that happened then, because it was a completely different world. However, Gaza too is quite an exception. because over there, the Brits are planning to do exactly the same thing they've done before. Now, that is the most unlogical thing to think, and yet that's exactly what happened. And it ends up in a quite disastrous way.
The Second Battle of Gaza was a bloody British repulse. As Kut had ended Nixon's command, Gaza ended Murray's. The Turks still barred the road to Jerusalem and Damascus. The British and Australian troops settled down for a long wait in the empty, scorching wastes of the Sinai.
Our biggest problem was monotony. You'd see the sun get up in a big red ball in the morning, and you'd go around in a big red ball at night. And that was your only sense of time, actually. And nothing but sand dunes as far as the eye could see. And you had the heat in the day, you're lying in the sand, the glare of the sun, the glare of the desert. Your rifle barrels would get that hot in the middle of the day that you couldn't hold them. You'd have to hold it with a wood.
So, in the months after Gaza 2, for almost half a year, everything settles down. A trench warfare is developing, not like the Western Front, mind you, however, very similar in the same idea. However, we don't have that, let's say, excessive shelling and terrible living conditions that you had in Western Europe, in the Western Front. However, here, boredom, heat, flies, and so on take their toll. Morale is probably at the worst stage possible. Places like where the Anzac Memorial, that's an area which nearby is a place called Sheikh Abbas. And over there, that's an area where the Australians, and not only there, they were sitting along the line. And during those months, quite a lot of stuff is happening. I know, history books don't tell us about that. They say we were waiting for half a year. Well, not exactly. This is taken at the War Cemetery in Beersheba. It's a monument that was erected, very strangely. It's hard to read, but if you see the bottom lines, it mentions that this was built actually by the enemy in honor of one of the pilots. After the capture of the area of the line, about a week after Beersheba, this monument was found. And the Australian Air Force decided to do an honor to those pilots, both British and Australian, that were killed in action, and we don't know where their bodies are, where they were buried, if at all. And this happened in those months between Gaza 2 and Beersheba. Today, it lies over there in honor of those pilots. And if I want to come back to a very famous event, here we are with the one and only Australian pilot, aircrew, VC in the World War. And his daring attempt to save a British comrade who his plane was shot down in the area. As you can see, the Turkish patrol just behind, and we can see the fire set up from McNamara's own plane, because he landed next to this one, tried to take over the pilot, was shot down in the, again, and it was destroyed. Later on, they managed to fix the British plane, and heavily wounded by now, he manages to take off and to arrive. Later on, he will become the airfield marshal of the Australian forces.
At the gates of Palestine, the British forces south of Gaza also had a new commander, General Allenby, sometimes known as the Bull. Allenby's leadership transformed the bored troops in the Sinai Desert into an army eager to attack. Preparations for a great offensive gathered speed. Allenby wrote home,
"I shall not attempt anything on a big scale until I have got what has been promised me. I've made a lot of changes since I came out here and have now a good staff and some capable commanders. My army is in good spirits and is confident of success.
The objective remained the same: the Holy Land and Syria, Damascus and Jerusalem. In September 1917, Allenby was ready. It was the year of the Russian Revolution, the year of Passchendaele. Britain badly needed a prestige victory. Lloyd George told Allenby that he was expected to give the British nation Jerusalem as a Christmas present. Cavalry was the instrument of victory. Allenby tricked the Turks into thinking he was going to make another attack on Gaza, while his horsemen rode in a wide sweep to launch a surprise attack on the Turkish flank at Beersheba.
So, it was mentioned that Allenby tricked. Well, of course, there were people doing it for him. And probably the most colorful character is this gentleman over here with a strange name, which sounds very German, but it was actually Dutch. And he was acting as the chief intelligence officer in the headquarters of General Allenby. Quite a character, very arrogant and yet colorful, a bird watcher who had world fame for some of his discoveries. However, a very questionable guy as well. If you read on the internet, you're going to find quite a lot of different opinions about him. But one thing is sure, he was quite a character. So much so that people found it worthy to show him in a very interesting way, also on films. One of the films, which is quite fascinating, is the Light Horseman. And I'll give a few parts of the Light Horseman shortly. However, I want to take a comic relief for a minute and look at it from a completely different angle. So, in order to do that, let's not forget that Indiana Jones, yeah, I'm going that far. Indiana Jones was fighting the Nazis in World War II. We know that from the films, right? Okay, so what happened when he was younger? He was fighting in World War I. And we don't know that. And that's the reason why a brilliant series of films was created, I think, some 20 years ago. The Adventures of the Young Indiana Jones. One of the films, a full-length film, about 90 minutes, I think, is dedicated to the daredevils of the desert. In other words, the Light Horsemen. However, what I wanted to show you is a part that is showing us Indiana Jones. Here is still called in his name Henry, who is going to be a part of Meinhard Hagen's plot, how to deceive the Turks to believe that the next charge is going to be on Gaza, while it's really going to be on Beersheba. At the same time, we're also going to have here an escort, Australian escort. We'll see him in a minute. And just to make life a little bit more interesting, we're going to hear and see someone very colorful as well, and that will be none less than Lawrence. Here, he'll be called Ned.
Bye. Captain Defoe's Belgian Army reporting as ordered, sir.
Oh, you made it. Jolly good to see you again. Are you surprised to hear from me?
You could say that, sir.
I just did. Now, where's the flasted thing? I had it here yesterday. Bottom drawer. I should have known. Ah, my binoculars. Here they are. Now.
You're just in time.
Shall we?
Shall we what?
Bird watching, mate. And don't you feel silly for asking.
Desert hawk. Beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful. If these hills weren't crawling with Turks.
Tosh! There's no enemy here. What do you know about birds, Sergeant?
They got wings.
Australian?
Yeah. John Anders, 4th Light Horse. Friends call me Jack.
Henri Defoe. Mine call me Henry.
Put it there then, Henry. You don't sound Belgian. American, I reckon.
I decided to enlist. Wanted to do my part.
Same as me and Phyllis for king and country.
Phyllis?
Yeah, me horse. Figured we travel the world, see exotic lands, get shot at by people with machine guns. Ain't that right, darling? So what is it?
It's a red-breasted hooper. What luck?
These damn red-breasted lancer. Bloody hell.
Oh my, Turks! Provided with medical attention.
I'll get a doctor. Keep some pressure on the wound.
Oh, do stop. It's just a scratch. In fact, it's not even that.
Sir, what's...
Calf's blood from the kitchen. I simply placed the bag under my arm and gave it a jolly good squeeze. Quite an illusion, don't you think?
Had me fooled. So what the hell's going on here?
Deception. Trickery. A flim-flam designed to convince the Turks that the blood-stained haversack that I left behind was genuine.
The haversack?
Well, it contains certain documents indicating that we intend to launch another full-scale attack on Gaza within the week. It's a lie, but if they believe it, then they will concentrate all their defenses there and leave the real target vulnerable.
So what is the real target?
Beersheba.
Ned? I can't believe it. What are you doing here? Are you in on this?
No, I merely provided miners some information. The fact that you joined the intelligence service, for example.
So this is your fault?
Guilty, as charged. News of your little escapade spreading through camp.
Excellent. With all the spies knocking about the camp, word is bound to get back to the Turks.
Well, actually, there isn't a book who's talking about espionage during the Great War which is not mentioning this trick, and it did the job. Mind you, the Turkish-German side says they didn't fall for it. They just didn't have enough troops. Trying to balance and to look into what happened really in reality over there, it seems that it did do its damage. Anyway, so here we are coming to that great detour thing, circling around Beersheba. The war of Beersheba lasted actually for something like 3-4 days, but the decisive day is the 31st of October. Then we have the frontal attack of the infantry from the west and the southwest towards the defense system, the Turkish defense system, which are painted here in green, around Beersheba. However, at the same time, a tremendously long, and it developed lots of development of water sources on the way in order to be able to bring such a mass number of horses and men over to the far flank, far beyond Beersheba to the east. And then at the beginning of the day, after the infantry succeeded, over here in this section, everything was stuck because the Turks were putting tremendous resistance, especially at two sites, a place called Sakati and a place called Siba, which is really Sheba, Beersheba, the biblical city of Beersheba, today National Park, a World Heritage Site. Anyway, it will take some time because unless Sheba and Sakati were taken, there was no way that you could ride through the open plain over here and charge Beersheba. As that took so long, we're coming to a late afternoon hour. We're only 1 hour left of light, and that's where some of the, I would say, boldest and very, very unique decisions had to take place.
As you are well aware, our advance on Beersheba has been seriously delayed. Fortifications of unknown strength still face us across a plain of some 3 miles, and the sun sets in 1 hour, by which time some of our horses will have been without water for 48 hours. Unless we take the wells of Beersheba intact, we not only face defeat, but a military disaster. What are your views?
Sir.
Yes, Grant.
I believe my brigade could take the town if given a free hand.
I must know what you propose.
To make a mounted charge against the eastern defences, sir. I have 2 regiments, the 4th and 12th, close at hand.
Tearosh, if there's to be a charge, then surely it must be made by my cavalry, who are armed with swords. Brigadier Grant's men are mounted infantry.
They are, Fitzgerald. We're constantly reminded of that fact. Hudson.
60,000 men have failed to take this town in 12 hours. How can 800 horsemen possibly succeed in less than 1 hour?
You don't believe they can do it?
No one has ever attempted a cavalry charge against entrenched infantry supported by machine guns and artillery. It's unheard of, sir.
Do you see any alternative in the time available?
Well, no, sir, but
Very well. Put Grant straight at it.
I think this was one of the boldest decisions a general took in the war, at least at that part of the world, because the Australian General Chauvel, that we just saw, really had an impossible situation. And in most cases, it would be accepted that that's it. We can't fulfill, we're going to do it in the morning. And we're going to suffer the consequences, which means mostly the thirst of the animals and the people. And yet, this bold decision was taken, and it is not that understood, because this was so bold. Because to take over through the trenches that were mentioned, that is something that really hasn't been done. Not only that hasn't been done, the mounted infantry did not have the tools, the weapons, or the training for this type of an attack. And yet, the decision was made, and those very bold soldiers took upon themselves to ride forward. That piece that I just showed, and 2 or 3 short captures that I'm going to show now, are all different phases of this advance of the light horsemen, and it's coming from a film of that name that was made about 30 years ago in the 80s, The Light Horsemen.
British cavalry advancing on the eastern flank.
They are not cavalry. They're Australian light horse.
Whoa! Wait!
Wait until they dismount, then fire by order!
But that's exactly it. They didn't dismount. They were acting according to all their trainings and everything that they were equipped for and trained for. They were going to charge all the way through, which means more and longer approach than any cavalry is basically capable of doing. Most times a charge would be 600-800 yards, max, tops, 1,000. Here, there was over 3,000 yards of approach in a gallop, in a charge, which is unheard of, and it was executed in the most incredible way. Furthermore, having no swords, the ultimate weapon of cavalry, they just picked up their bayonets and used it as swords. They were moving so fast that actually they outrun the guns. You see, when you have this range and the artillery is prepared for that range, and they have to now shorten the distance, they have to start, we're not talking about today with technology, we're talking about physically rolling it up. And that was too fast. The movement was so fast that after going through some trouble at the very beginning, after a few seconds they already passed it and the Turks were never able to adjust again. So actually they were saved from most of the artillery fire. Later on it will happen the same way, also with the rifles. Moving so fast forward, the Turkish, under the pressure of seeing people galloping at you with swords, what they couldn't know it's not. In the hands of the people, you don't have time now to sit down and adjust the ranges. And so, very shortly, the same thing will happen with the infantry. They will not suffer that much casualties because the Turks were firing above their heads. All I can say is that trying to put myself on a horse and to think about me galloping towards something like that, I'm not certain most people, myself included, would have the courage to do what those young, brave people did. They were exercising probably the highest level of soldiership that one can imagine. And to be honest, from the film, we have the feeling that like almost everyone got hit. In reality, the amount of casualties was so small that no one believed it at the end of the battle. Roughly, we're talking about 15% of casualties. From them, about less than 4% of casualties, about 30 people. But for each individual, that's a whole world. However, if we're looking at the larger picture, what a victory. Here we see a close-up a little bit on the area of the charge itself. We're talking about 2 regiments of the 4th Mounted Brigade, concentrated from the area where we saw before that Henry Chauvel was positioned. We see the build-up of the 4th and the 12th Australian Light Horse Regiments building up and riding along this little valley, attacking that. What we saw was mostly the 4th. However, at one stage they mix. The first wave went over the trenches and continued to ride into Beersheba to secure the water wells, because that was what it was all about, to secure the water supply. And the others, as we saw in the film, dismounted and started to engage face-to-face combat. And at the end of a fairly short period of time, all this was over and Beersheba was taken. There are many sites in Beersheba and around and throughout the country that are commemorating the deeds of what happened that day and throughout the campaign. One of the most impressive ones is the place that Vicky mentioned before, the Australian Soldier Park in Beersheba. This is the piece that was mentioned that was brought over here, over there from Australia, and it's in the middle of a fascinating park that was put forward by the Pratt Foundation. It's a park that one part of it is dedicated to this. However, the major part is actually state-of-the-art, really state-of-the-art park for children with all accessibility, mostly for disabled, but open for the whole public. And it's one of the most moving places to visit, because here we have on one side commemoration, and on the other we have this thing about the kids, and it's so beautiful. However, that is not the end of the campaign. That's the beginning of the campaign and of the Holy Land. And over the next few weeks, some dramatic things will happen.
Outmaneuvered, the Turks fell back, with Allenby in relentless pursuit. In 10 days, the British advanced 50 miles. Arab fishing boats carried essential supplies to beaches close behind the advancing army. While the Arabs hauled their craft ashore, Allenby's pursuit swept on. The Turks were split in 2, one group amid the orange groves of the plain of Eran, and the other in the stony hills of Judea. Allenby swung his main weight east, towards Jerusalem, racing to beat the onset of the winter rains.
And then we began to approach the Judean hills. Here we met deluges of rain, and as we went up those hills, it became colder and colder. We had certainly got our jackets, but we were wet through from morning till night. With it came troubles with the camels. The camel is no mountaineer, and the Judean hills consists not very high hills, but ridge after ridge after ridge. You know you've got a certain destination, which will take you some hours to get. Each time you hope that the next ridge is the last, but there's always one more ridge, one more ridge.
On December the 11th, 1917, the Allies took Jerusalem. Allenby entered the conquered city humbly, on foot, in contrast to the Kaiser, who in 1898 had ridden on horseback through a gap specially made in the ancient walls. Jerusalem was the first famous city to fall to the Allies during 4 years of war. For the first time, an Allied army received the keys of such a city from the mayor. For the first time, the Allies posted proclamations of military government on the walls of a captured capital. A spiritual capital, the holiest city of three religions, Christian, Jewish, and Mohammedan. The British nation had received its Christmas present.
And indeed, Jerusalem is the big prize. However, and I'm adding my personal opinion about that, only due to politics, it's not today's politics, today's world politics, it's not receiving its proper recognition. And I will tell you, next year there are not going to be international events to commemorate the fall of Jerusalem. However, throughout the world at that time, this is when the bells went over throughout the Commonwealth, everywhere. This is where the front pages worldwide recorded what happened. But there was also side anecdotes. One of them is about the incredible story of how Jerusalem, nothing there can go like straightforward and easy. Anyone who's visited Jerusalem knows, thank God, it's a mess, and therefore everything there is complicated. And so even a simple, straightforward thing like surrendering the city had to take its very unique turn. Jerusalem surrendered 6 times, each time to a higher level, starting from 2 cooks that were lost in the fog and met the first delegation of the surrendering, all the way to the general of the 60th Division of London, who officially accepted the right for General Allenby to come into the city 2 days later and do what we have seen before. These are 2 sergeants, the first photo of that from London. As you can see, they are still in their shorts down over there, and it's January for the simple thing. Allenby pushed his forces so much forward that was just not enough time to bring them the supplies. So this is what they had. The most important thing from their point of view, because they explained right from the first second, listen, we're sergeants, we're not officers or generals, we can't accept that. But please, do you have fire? Because one night before they received packs of cigarettes, but no matches. And so they were just desperate for fire. Saying that, here's taking it to a twist. Look at the soldier at the center of that photo, and look what became of him later on. So you see, cigarettes was a major thing then. Here's something, again, just giving us some idea of how the world looked at it. This was taken, this is from The Punch, which was really the most, I would say, sarcastic newspaper in the UK of that time. And look what they have here. This idea about Richard Lionheart, who, according to the story, shaded his face not to see Jerusalem, vowing, I will not look upon you until I stand at your gates, which never happened. And now, as we see, he's looking happily toward Jerusalem, and it says down there at the bottom to the right, my dream comes true. So there you are with a little bit of understanding of that. On the approach toward Jerusalem, the Desert Mounted Corps, mostly Australians, is arriving in the area of the Moshavot. These were the Jewish colonies that were spread throughout the area, I would say, south of Tel Aviv, southeast of Tel Aviv of today. General Chauvel made his headquarters at the city mostly named as New Diran. However, the Israelis call it Rehovot. Here we see the staff at the entrance to a private house of that time. Today, one of the most respected schools in Rehovot. And it's possible to visit his headquarters and many, many other sites over there in the city of Rehovot. What's the significance really of the charge of Beersheba? Because many people ask, and we hear this notion about, that's where everything starts, the state of Israel and all that. Yes, it's a very important link in the chain, a very important one. But we're talking about a chain. We're talking about links connecting one to another, leading one to another, and leading over.
Towards the end of the 19th century, another race was reviving memories of nationhood, the Jews. They had scattered across the globe after the Roman Emperor Titus had captured Jerusalem in AD 70. Now there was a movement to bring the Jewish race home again and build in Palestine a new Jewish state. The Turkish Empire, so long senile and decadent, was crumbling into collapse. Her Arab lands had already been the subject of hard, secret bargaining between France and Britain. But there were other parties to be considered now. Britain had encouraged Arab hatred of the Turk. She had sent Sharif Hussein of Mecca and his son, Faisal, money, weapons and explosives.
But there you are. That's where the thing started. We see how the two different sides, the Jews on one side and the Arabs on the other side, are getting promises. And these promises sometime collide.
The Arabs believed that as a reward for their help, Great Britain would only conclude peace on terms that gave freedom to the Arab peoples. The Jewish hope of rebuilding a nation in Palestine and founding a new state of Israel grew brighter in the shadow of Turkey's defeats. The Allies needed the help and support of Jews throughout the world. They bought that help as they had bought the help of the Arabs, with promises.
His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil or religious rights of existing non-Jews in Palestine.
The statement we just heard is the Balfour Declaration. Here's the incredible piece of information. It was agreed upon and the draft was okayed, so to say, exactly at the same time when the charge took place. At that very moment when the Australians were racing towards Beersheba, at that very same moment, the British cabinet is sitting down and approving this. And this means that this connection is quite incredible. 2 days later, after the approval was taken, and after that it was put in right, and the news from Beersheba came through that we, the British, are holding already to a little bit of the Holy Land itself, then this letter was handed over to Lord Rothschild. In the Jewish heritage, listen, that's a major statement. That's the first time that a major power accepts and acknowledges that we have a right for a national house in our historical homeland. And so this is in Hebrew, but this is basically giving us everything to do about that glorified day, the 2nd of November, 1917. That's what it says up there in Hebrew at the top. And then we have the, let's say, more festive way of putting that straightforward document that we saw a second ago. Saying all that, that was just the first step towards that. We still had one more major offensive in the war. There were several others, including the involvement of the Australians, especially in the Judean desert, the Transjordan air raids, and so on. However, everything was building up for the last major event of the war in the area of the Holy Land, and that will take place at September 1918, known as the Battle of Armageddon, which is quite a powerful saying.
Early in the morning of September the 19th, 1918, Allenby struck under cover of a hurricane barrage. His troops tore a gap in the Turkish positions on the coast, wheeled right, and shepherded the Turks into the hills. Allenby's cavalry swept forward across the Turkish communications. Cooperation between cavalry and aircraft, the oldest and the newest striking forces in war, brought Allenby a brilliant victory. Ceaseless air attacks isolated von Sanders from his troops and blocked the crossings of the River Jordan. The Turkish armies strove to escape. Only the German soldiers remained steady in the welter of confusion and disaster. The cavalry rode 70 miles in 24 hours to cut off the Turkish retreat to the north. In 3 days, Allenby destroyed 2 Turkish armies. Beyond the Jordan, in the twisted, barren hills, a 3rd Turkish army was cut to pieces by Arabs, avenging the cruelties of centuries of Turkish rule.
The Australian forces were doing an incredible piece of work over there during the Armageddon campaign. They rode, as you heard, some 70 miles in 24 hours, all the way up to the Vale of Jezreel. You know it as the Plains of Armageddon. And over there, they have this attack on Nazareth, the headquarters of the German-Turkish forces in this part of the world. Others attack different sites in northern Samaria of today, towns like Jenin, Bet Shean or Bisan. Others go over the Jordan River and climb up to the mountains to do most of the work that described here as the doing of the Arabs. But that will include quite a lot of the Australian forces and New Zealanders. And by the way, also the Jewish battalions that were raised during the war and were already participating in the Great War as well. However, I would say that probably the most striking event, Australian striking event, is the capture of Tzemach. Tzemach is one of the railway stations on the south part of the Sea of Galilee. And here a daring attack of cavalry takes place and take over the station. The station was lately restored. There's quite a lot of activity around it, including plaques commemorating the activities of the Light Horse. These are some of the Australian Light Horse Association visiting Tzemach about 2 years ago. This is a part of the ceremony that took place on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, which you can see in the background over there. Since then, the plaque that was put over there temporarily was moved over to the main station itself, where we see this today, which is showing us the map of the Tzemach area and the area of the attack. When we're talking about history, everything is linked. We're talking about links. And all this is building up to this chain of events. And here's an incredible thing that came forward by who would become the leader and the founder of the State of Israel. And take a look at this very powerful saying. For centuries, the Jewish people had asked in prayer, will there be a state for the people? No one had ever imagined the terrifying question, will there be a people for the state when it comes into being? And of course, we're talking now about what will happen during the Second World War. And although the Balfour Declaration is the beginning, no doubt that the events that happened during World War II speeded up the process that will lead over 3 years later, in 1948, towards the establishment of the State of Israel. Not saying that it's because of the Holocaust, it's not. However, it speeded up things. And here's the answer. This is an event, this was taken last Thursday. A very moving project that takes place every year when Jewish delegations from all over the world make their way to the death camps in Europe, participate in a special march known as the March of the Living that takes place from the death camps of Auschwitz to Birkenau. After that, those delegates come over to Israel and participate in the Remembrance Day and Independence Day celebrations. What we see here are the members of the march just next to the Wailing Wall, and I must say, there was quite a lot of Australian youth participating in this. I met with quite a lot of them over the last weekend, just before I take the flight over here.